I appreciate you taking the time, mate. I came across you on the Twitters, obviously, like most of my interviews derive from. And I just, I want to get a sort of little bit more of a sense of your perspective on the Atropa ecosystem and what have you. But let's start with sort of a brief intro of yourself, a little a little bit about yourself.
Okay. Yeah. Well, I grew up in Michigan. Basically, I got into crypto a long time ago. I bought Bitcoin when it was, probably under $1. Um, but I never really held on to it. I just kind of bought and sold it for a while. Um, Ethereum came into play a long time ago. I told a friend about it. I never really invested in Ethereum because of just my financial situation at the time. I was younger. But my buddy did, and he did really well by mining Ethereum. Um, then later on, my brother and I are working together. He's telling me about this guy named Richard Hart. So my brother had found out about Hex and this pulse chain that was going to launch. We got into watching his videos and stuff like that, and just kind of following Richard. We had never really invested into Hex, but just kind of like we're watching it for the sacrifice phase, right? So my brother, he had put money into the sacrifice. I did not personally. I just decided that I was going to wait until after it launched. But yeah, so we basically were on Pulse Chain when it first launched. We're looking at different projects that are launching on the blockchain, watching like the live new pairs. I think one of the first coins that I bought into was that Pulse Reflections token. It was one of the first reward coins that gave people PLS. So we both got into that, and we became admins of the chat really quickly. And basically, that was how I was able to grow my PLS bag. So I was able to invest in a lot of other projects. And then a couple months into Pulse Chain, one of the other admins inside PRS, he told me about this little group that he had, that they were looking at all these different copied coins. All these coins were copied over to Pulse Chain, and they were kind of doing research into, what may be a cool copy coin to buy into. And, we were all kind of speculating on those. PDI came about because actually one guy bought it as like a joke. He's like, "Hey guys, like, what if we buy this and it goes to $1, right? Ha ha ha!" It's kind of like a funny thing. So we put $50 in and got 1 million PDI at one point. So yeah, and anyways, once we started to buy that, we kind of noticed that the PDI was connected to another coin through the liquidity pool, right, which was the Tropa. And that's just kind of how we stumbled onto a Tropa, right? Just kind of like by happenstance. And then once it was there, there was no real dev to talk to, right? So it was just kind of a really crazy situation where we were like, what is going on? Why is all this liquidity burned? And, why are these other tokens connected to Atropa and all these things? So yeah, that's kind of how I got started, I guess, on Pulse Chain.
Right, okay. Interesting. Yeah, that's funny because I had a similar experience when I was speaking to Pulse Pup of the Pup token. I realized that he'd created a G'day Pulse Pup pair himself, and that's what led me down the rabbit hole. So a similar story, but I've been looking at Atropa for a while, and I haven't gone as deep as I'd like to. But um, can you give us from your perspective, like what would be the elevator pitch for Atropa?
So basically, an elevator pitch would be similar to like on Pulse Chain, right? We have this decentralized blockchain, right? Or what we view it as a decentralized blockchain. Obviously, Richard is in control of a lot of the OA funds and things like that, which people say is not so decentralized, but obviously there's good and bad reasons for that, right? Obviously, like Apple company holds a lot of their own stock for certain reasons, right? But anyways, we have this decentralized blockchain here, and we have these copied over coins. And I think that the real pitch here is like Atropa is trying to basically help bring liquidity from Ethereum to Pulse Chain by way of the P stables, right? Because these are very well-known copied coins, right? Everybody knows DAI, everybody knows USDT, everybody knows USDC, right? And we want to think of these coins as like kind of like brand names, right? When people look at Pulse Chain, They know SHIB, they know Doge, they know DAI, things like that, right? But DAI is a dollar on Ethereum, obviously, and DAI is not a dollar here on Pulse Chain. But if we were to bring up these P stables to a dollar, with having this Atropa ecosystem attached to it, we would be like one of the most liquid blockchains in existence. We would have like billions of dollars in liquidity throughout this whole ecosystem. And that's what whales really look for when they're looking to invest in a new blockchain. If there's not enough liquidity, they're not going to bring millions of dollars over because they're going to get wrecked on slippage. And currently, if we just look at Pulse Chain as it is, the DAI from Ethereum, the USDT from Ethereum, things like that, they only have like a certain amount of millions of dollars in the liquidity pool right now. So if you're a whale over on Ethereum and you have $20 million, you're not going to be bridging over your $20 million into a $10 million liquidity pool. You know what I'm saying? So there, we need this robust ecosystem to be alive and to reach this dollar mark so that basically people can see that there is real value over here, right? And the mechanisms by which it gets to a dollar and stays there are kind of unknown to a lot of people, right? We have this Atropa ecosystem, but then we also see, on the other hand, this research that Nine Iron Capital has been doing, where they've been tracking the OA wallets and wallets that are connected to the OA, and seeing how they are actually collateralizing vaults inside the P maker vaults here on Pulse Chain, so that potentially we'd be able to use these protocols with our P DAI, basically. So there's like these two different totally separate mechanisms that are kind of happening. Like there's this liquidity ecosystem with Atropa that's connected to the P stables. Then we also have Richard Hart potentially messing around with the P maker vaults. So the elevator pitch really is just like, this kind of needs to happen for Pulse Chain to be taken very seriously. And this developer saw this from the very beginning and knew that this was the way, you know, to get people to recognize these P stables as actually being a dollar in the future. And then the flood of people that will come into Pulse Chain at that point will just create like a utopian DeFi blockchain, basically, that we're looking for.
Gotcha. Okay. And this developer, I think they go by Maria online.
Yeah, in the chat they go by Maria, but his name is James.
Yeah, I'm curious what's known about James. Has he been around for a while or?
James is a genius, and I mean I don't use that word lightly. He has worked previously for HP, for NASA, for Intel, for Bill Gates's company TerraPower. He basically, for NASA, I think he said that he worked on these like, basically he kind of said they were kind of like barcodes or like serial numbers that had to be like highly encrypted. And so he created this like, well, I don't even know what to call it, this like cryptography for NASA so they could encrypt their like serial numbers on different things. But yeah, he's been in the computer space for a long time. I think I watched one of his interviews that he did probably like 8 years ago. And he was talking about how at 6 years old, he was starting to code on computers. So this guy's been definitely like in the industry for a long time. He's an early Hex OG, so he bought into Hex like right at the beginning. And he's one of the largest Hex holders right now. I think his wallet is number 3 on the Hex list right now. But yeah, he's been a part of the ecosystem for a long time. He's known about Richard Hart for a long time. He thinks that Richard Hart is aware of what's going on. But yeah, no, definitely somebody that's a super positive and benevolent person. He's and just the way that they built the Atropa ecosystem, we can go into this in a little bit, but they basically created it in such a way that they've locked themselves in at a loss so that they can't basically what's the word, like manipulate too much. And like the IRC chat there is there for us to basically tell them if we think that they have too much power in any area or things like this. Like they keep everything open and they want us to communicate with them about things that may be that we see as like a risky situation or whatever it may be.
Right, okay. Yeah, because I interviewed, like I said, with Coexistence, and he mentioned this symbiotic relationship between various tokens like Teddy, I guess PDI, and a bunch of others. Now, can you try to sort of in simple terms describe how that how that relationship operates practically?
Yeah, so the way that Atropa was kind of started, right, was The developer had a large bag of PDI, right, which they used to pair up to the first coin that they created, a Tropa, right? So they used, I forget the percentages, but I'm pretty sure they created a Tropa and then paired 50% of it to Dai and then burned that, right? And then they used that other 50% of the Atropa that they had, and then they paired that with TSFI and then burned that. And then they used a portion of the TSFI to create down, and then they paired that, and then also used a portion of Atropa into down. It's just, it's a weird web, right? But the way that it works is like when people buy in from PLS, they have to buy into PDI, right? And then if they look a little deeper, they'll buy into a Tropa. And then deeper, even down the rabbit hole, obviously would be the TSFI and the down. And so TSFI and down, they're highly connected to a Tropa by the liquidity pools. So if PDI goes up in price, the Atropa is super, super connected to PDI, right? So then it's just going to move the Atropa price up like almost identically. And you can actually see on the charts, they're pretty much identical. But then if you go another step below, right, they still move with the Tropa, but in a little bit different way because there's not as many buyers. But once people do buy down into those, right, it kind of makes that growth a bit more exponential, right? Because the liquidities are a bit more spread out. But the way that there's a lot of different little ecosystems within Atropa, just kind of like this, right? But the first one was the Atropa TSFI down and then legal, right? When they created the legal token off of down, that basically locked them into the ecosystem, so they couldn't manipulate things. They were basically put themselves in the hole from the start, and there was all these burned liquidity pools that they can't take out from, and then they had to basically buy back certain positions of certain tokens after that. And it basically makes that legal token basically made that little ecosystem like a legal situation. So if anybody looked into it, like the SEC or something like that, they would see that these tokens were created, liquidities were burned, and tokens were bought back in like a legitimate fashion.
Right, fascinating. Okay, so there's this current production that I'm on, I've been, I got pulled into through what are referred to as degens. From my previous production, I discovered degens and this culture. How does degen, I'm quite familiar with the degen behavior in the general crypto circles, but how does it differ here in this Atropa um, ecosystem? Is the behavior different in terms of how you think of degens in regular crypto?
No, I guess this is like I think it's just really similar actually, because to basically buy into some of these things, especially these deeper into the web tokens, like you don't know what the hell is going to happen with them. You don't, there's no information by the developer. There's no websites besides community made websites. And there was never really any information besides like what the developer says inside the IRC chat, which sometimes is just like crazy nonsense, right? And that's, I don't know if you've read through the logs before,
I've
the
read some
chat
of them,
logs.
yeah, through Coexistence blog.
So basically, like if you go through it, there's a lot of just nonsense in there, and it's like a lot of just I mean, you can't even explain what it is. It's just crazy talk, honestly, and it kind of deters a lot of people, and I think maybe that's why they do it. But you need to be a degen to basically buy into something, not knowing, what even the name of it is, because some of these names of the tokens are like just symbols, right? So I mean, the nature of the degen is to basically ape into something and just hope it number go up, right? And so you kind of have to have that mentality a bit to, like a little be a lot more risk averse. It seems like when Atropa was launched, so many people just stayed away from it, and I mean obviously for good reason. People are nervous, and Richard Hart told everybody a long time ago just to stick to his products because he was pretty much the only non-scammer out there, right, that he knew of. But now he's built a blockchain, right, and those rules really don't apply anymore. People have to really kind of see for themselves and kind of get a feeling for what's going on, because we can't just stick to Richard's coins and an entire blockchain, right? Like there's going to be a lot of missed opportunities if people do that. But obviously Richard was trying to keep people safe long ago when he only had hex, right? So that was the motto. I just think things have changed now, and to be getting into the Atropa ecosystem back then, you had to be a degen. Nowadays, not so much, because we have so much more information. It's becoming a lot less risky, and as DAI grows to $1, I think it's just going to grow faster and faster because it becomes less risky the higher it gets.
Right, okay. In Let me just double check here. Good. Yeah, so about that getting PDI to $1, I assume there's some sort of you know game plan in that regard. And does it involve rotating, or what I've come to understand as rotation and ratios, or rotating ratios across various project pools? Or am I completely way off there?
No, I wouldn't say so. I think that they created this web of tokens as like um to basically create liquidity out of nothing, right? So basically, they're creating a bunch of tokens and pairing them up to other created tokens that really don't have value, but they do have value when people put in their PLS and then put that PLS into PDI and then that PDI into, like, as PDI grows, it gives real value to all these other tokens, and then basically they all become harder to move because they're all interconnected at a certain point. Once PDI grows up to $1, Atropa is going to have like billions of dollars in the liquidity pool, and like the tokens connected to Atropa will have hundreds of millions of dollars in liquidity, and the ones connected to that will have tens of millions in liquidity, right? So it's just going to be like this web of super super crazy thick liquidity that is like really hard to manipulate and move. Nobody can buy in too much. Like, people will be able to buy in millions of dollars and not affect the price like too drastically. It'll be really really crazy to see, honestly. um what was the first part of your question? I'm sorry, if we could just step back for a second.
Yeah, I guess I'm just trying to dig into the mathematics a
Oh,
little bit, and understanding how what people refer to when they're saying they're rotating or ratios.
when I talk about ratios and rotating, so when I look at different coins, like, so the TSFI and Atropa, let's just say, I look at the ratio chart instead of like at the USD chart. So it shows me like how up or down TSFI is compared to Atropa. So like if a bunch of people are buying into TSFI, the TSFI versus Atropa chart is going to be going up, and basically you'll be able to get less Atropa for your TSFI. But when TSFI starts going down and Atropa's up, you can swap and basically collect more of one or the other and kind of keep growing your bag that way. But it's a bit more risky maneuver to do that because you don't really know how the markets are going to go, unless you're a good trader. But it's even hard to trade these coins, honestly.
Yeah, no, and it
But yeah,
looks like the vision is.
I'm not exactly sure with how, in terms of the ratios, building the dollar value of PDI is coming into play. I'm not really too familiar with that, honestly. I'm not, yeah, I'm just not really aware.
Yeah, it does feel like a quite a sort of messy or organic sort of growth, that where nobody's really in charge, but you can see who the bigger bag holders are. But like you say, the way that the Atropa was created suggests that it was there to reduce the potential for manipulation from like these potentially benevolent whales in the ecosystem, right? Has that been
Mhm.
has that worked out?
Yeah, so I mean, it's basically just to keep the developer from doing any type of like liquidity extractions, right? So they've locked themselves into the ecosystem in such a way that they can't really harm the system. It's not that nobody else can harm the system. That's a potential, right? So if somebody got in too early, too big, right, that could potentially be a harm to the system in the future. But they've actually gone through all the tokens that they've created. They keep on this in their GitHub. It's the addresses.sol inside their GitHub. They just audited the full list of tokens. I think they went through like 60. But basically, they went through and looked at their position, the other top holders' positions, and they frequently go through these audits and make sure that the system is healthy, that nobody can really manipulate it too much to where it's gonna affect anything too deeply.
Okay, got ya.
Mhm.
And in the inverse relationship with liquidity bonding, is this a key feature of the Atropa ecosystem?
Could you just explain that a little differently? I'm sorry. What do you mean the
Well,
inverse?
I've been, liquidity bonding is the act of creating these pools, right?
Mhm.
Um,
Yes.
which is obviously it must be an important feature, but can you sort of break it down a little bit further again trying to simplify
Yeah,
the
so this
relationship.
is probably one of the first times that we've seen this type of ecosystem be built. I don't think on Solana or Ethereum or Polygon or other blockchains we've seen any type of liquidity webs where a token is created and then two others off of that and then three others off of those. And I don't think we've ever seen anything like that before. So this is definitely one of the first times this has ever been attempted. And it seems like the dev has worked on this idea for a long time. But in terms of liquidity bonding, it's definitely very, very important because it helps basically when people buy in, it helps stabilize things as the price moves up. When somebody buys into one asset, it moves up the prices of the other assets. And then as people trickle down inside, it basically just stabilizes the first one even more because the liquidity grows on the back end as well. So I'm not sure if I explained that too simply, but that's as well as I can, I think.
No, that was great. I'm just like, what do you perceive as the biggest risk to this ecosystem? Like, can it be hijacked? I'm quietly confident some people probably see it as a bit scammy or has a scammy feel to it. So, like, how would you defend against such
Yeah,
accusations?
so basically, I would say that the way that it could be harmed is if the developer chose to sell all the assets that they were holding and just like go out to PLS and out to Ethereum. I think that would just obviously kill everything. So there does have to be a bit of trust in a trustless system, right? In a certain kind of aspect. But what they want us to do is keep them in check, right? The developers ask them like, hey, watch my wallets, make sure that everything is healthy. They from the start locked themselves inside this ecosystem in such a way where they thought they wouldn't be able to do too much harm. And that we would see that, right, with the burned liquidities and things like that show a benevolent nature. He's not trying to extract any of these liquidity pools. But other than that, it does require a little bit of trust and people to just continually watch. I think that the goal of getting the P stables to $1 and really ushering in a new era of decentralized finance is probably a lot more important to this person than just extracting a bit of value. They already are a millionaire. They've made lots and lots of money through hacks in the past. And so they're not somebody that's just looking to make a quick buck. I really do believe that they have like the good of everybody in the world and Richard Hart's same ethos, within them. So that's my belief, and I know that people from the outside may be more nervous about that, but they're in the public's eyes now. They've been doing meetups in public. They did one in California. They just recently did one in Zurich, and now they're doing the Pulse Chain Tour, right? So they're going to be in Amsterdam on June 15th, speaking in front of everybody in Pulse Chain, right? With RG3 and everybody that we all know and love and have known for a long time. They're going to be giving a presentation about their ecosystem, and it's probably going to open up a lot of people's minds at that point, I think.
Right on. Yeah, I was invited to Amsterdam to that event, but unfortunately I'm otherwise occupied at that time.
Oh yeah, so I'm actually going to try to be there. I'm working out the arrangements right now. I'm actually in Thailand currently.
Right, okay. Now that would have been great had I not had other plans already, but um so a lot of this is essentially moving value around this web, it feels like.
Right, or getting
And
people to buy in. Yeah.
yeah, and this activity of moving value around these various pools in this web are what attracts other users in because they see this activity and they believe certain stories that the developer says or that the community says, and then that's essentially where the value is created, right? Or the future.
Yeah, the value is created by people giving it value, obviously. But the ecosystem that they're building at Tropa is not just the only thing that they're doing, right? So they're actually building like a whole layer two ecosystem that's going to include like a private communications layer. It's going to include a game, like they're working on a MMORPG game that's going to be on this second layer. The dev is given some clues as to what it's going to be like. There's this old computer game from the 90s. I don't know if you might be aware of it. It's called Discworld Mud, but it was a text-based RPG game. And it's actually, people still play it from even like 30 years ago. People are still playing it today. And actually you can play it and make money in the game by going on different quests and things like that. And a lot of these tokens inside the ecosystem that they've created are going to be able to be used inside the game, right? So there's these tokens that have liquidities, or sorry, that have a token supply of 666. And these tokens have been spoken about to be used in the game in such a way, like you send one to an opponent and it'll have some type of effect on them inside the game. Um, and just if you look into this Discworld Mud, it's really, really interesting. This game where they drew the inspiration from. There's like different guilds you can join, and it's very, very deep. Like you can play the game for years and never like complete it. It's pretty much a never-ending game. And the reason why I think this is so cool is because when a bear market comes and people are like, oh, crypto's dead or whatever, I'm leaving. This gives us a mechanism by which we can keep transactions flowing because people will be playing this game to earn, right? People will be earning crypto basically all throughout the bear market and keeping volume and transactions going by utilizing these game activities, basically.
Right on. And where can I learn more about these layer two solution or projects from the A people?
Yeah, so basically the IRC chat is the main place that they talk about it.
Right, okay.
If you just go in and you hit the search button, you'll be able to type in dysnomia, Dysnomia, and it'll basically bring you up everything that they talk about dysnomia. And that's basically what they call the layer two ecosystem dysnomia. That's also the name of the game, supposedly.
Right, yeah, okay.
Mhm.
Okay, just a couple more questions. I was brought into onto Pulse Chain through the G'day token through meeting a fella called Too Spooky from well, he was a hexagon back then when I interviewed him. Now he's a Tangang. Tell me your thoughts on Tangang. Uh, they've been rolling pretty much since yeah. I've been rolling camera on those guys as well, watching them. Just curious to get your perspective.
Yeah, so I think that the Tengang, they've been, obviously they're old hexagons, but I think they got a little, there's like a competition right now, right? Between like their coins and the meme coins of Atropa and things like that, which I think is a healthy thing. I don't necessarily like all the nasty things that are said about
Your
beef going
video's
on.
frozen. Hang on.
Oh
Okay,
shoot,
you're back.
sorry.
You're back.
Yeah, no, I just think that there's a bit of a beef going on between the Tangang and people that are inside of Tropa. Each of us, each side calling people just being kind of rude, but healthy competition is one thing, and I really do believe in that. I do think that the Tangang has learned a thing or two from the Atropa ecosystem. Now that we see, their HOA coin is being liquidity bonded to all these new tokens that they're creating now, and I'm all for that, right? So if they see that the Atropa developer has done something that is the first of its kind, right? They want other people to kind of mimic what they've done. It's only going to help Pulse Chain grow. And I root for them, even though I don't buy anything that they produce, just because I've been called a scammer too many times by them. But I hope everything goes well with them. And I'm pretty sure it will. Too Spooky seems like a benevolent type of guy. Um, but yeah, no, really, I'm glad that we're all here, and Pulse Chain wouldn't be Pulse Chain if we didn't have either of the communities. So that's what
Yeah, and
I'd say.
it is interesting to watch the various groups on Pulse Chain as they've evolved, and I think I've identified maybe at least three or four or five major players or tribes, if you like. But I mean, you are all united under Richard Hart's um, Pulse Chain, and so it seems like yeah, you figure out or you create these relationships or friendships through these bonding of these tokens cross tribe, if you like. Is that right? Is that what I'm kind of witnessing?
Yeah, I mean, yeah, people definitely have joined their tribe, it seems like, and just to kind of everybody wants to support, what they're supporting, right? And if one person and that's like a leader in one community says like, hey, that's like a bad thing that's going on over there, the tribe is going to agree. And we kind of need these certain like sections of pulse chain to draw people in from the outside. You know, if we were all just kind of rooting for one thing, that would be kind of boring.
Definitely, and that's what there that makes me think of how much of this drama is manufactured, if you like. Um, but final question then, mate. What are your thoughts on the current Richard Hart community or ecosystem community? Like, you know, there's a lot going on, but tell us what you think about current situation.
Yeah, so I think that people got really excited for Pulse Chain, right? Like the sacrifice was huge, right? Like billions of dollars. There was a long time people waited for it, right? Um, it happened at like the top of Hex, right? So people, when people put their money in, it was a lot of money, right? And now that Hex is down, Pulse Chain didn't do as well as people thought. Maybe because of the SEC case, maybe not. You know, Richard stopped streaming. You know, all these things that can be looked at as like a negative, I guess. Um, but I think that what Richard created was just something that can never be taken away, right? So that was one of the things people were looking forward to, right? An immutable blockchain. Um, I think that sentiment is kind of turning back around now. The SEC case is looking like it's like a positive instead of such a negative. In my eyes, at least, I'm of the belief that Richard Hart was tempting the SEC to sue him in the first place. The outrage marketing and things like that wasn't necessary. It was necessary to draw eyes to him, and those eyes are going to be the SEC as well as people, retail investors. And I think that he did things in such a way to kind of to tempt them into suing him, right? And by doing this, they're going to make themselves look bad in the end, and it could change the sentiment of the United people in the United States, the citizens, how they view the government, how they view regulation, and it could be a big turning point for the financial world in general. Um, I do really think that things are going to be turning around soon. Obviously we've seen the sacrifice funds coming into buying certain tokens, which people are excited about. Obviously there was no expectations, but with like who's going to let billions of dollars just sit there and go to waste, right? Um, so yeah, no, I definitely think that people are like a lot of people that were old school in the community have left. And I think Richard Hart, I think I remember him talking about that happening, right? So he's like, the old whales will leave and there will be new whales in this new ecosystem. That was spoken about before Pulse Chain was launched. And I think we're seeing some of that happen after he kind of talked about eHex in such a way where he made pHex sound better. People got upset about that and just straight up left Pulse Chain in general and are still leaving, really. And I think that's a good thing because it just makes the people that are here and left over, we're the strong ones, right? We're the ones that have the true belief. And the ones that were on the edge, those are the people that had big bags that could have done a lot of damage later on. When the prices were higher and they had less conviction, they're like, okay, now's my time to get out. But now it's just the little guys that had the strong belief and that are going to basically take Pulse Chain and become like the new whales of the future, I guess. At least I'm hoping.
Yeah, right. And we've got 3.5 minutes left on this before we get cut off. So I do want to squeeze in one more question or two if I can, if that's okay.
Yeah.
I've, I've been, I saw that the Ten Gang where they launched the Hoa on another, I forget the name of the blockchain, but essentially what I'm trying to get is are these ecosystems, cross chain? Can they function cross chain instead of what Atrope is built on Pulse chain with all the it's still on Pulse chain? Can you see a future where these are interchain ecosystems, and wouldn't that strengthen the entire crypto space to the benefit of all instead of this?
In terms, yeah, I don't know. In terms of the Trope ecosystem, I know that it works on Pulse Chain and it wouldn't probably work anywhere else. I don't think we have any other blockchains that aren't like, or not many. I mean, they have. I don't know about Chia. I don't really know about a lot of other blockchains, but I mean, the other major blockchains are VC funded and have early inside investors, which Pulse Chain does not have. So I think Atropa really only works here. Whether or not later on you can take these assets cross chain, like PDI and things like that, I think there could be protocols in the future that would be able to make that happen, and that would be great, right? But for
Yeah,
now, I think.
because that often is
Go
the
ahead.
argument, isn't it? Is there's people trying to poach others from each other's chains or communities to come and that just doesn't feel very sustainable. It feels like it
Yeah,
should be the other way round, especially if you want to do this sort of symbiosis, or if you believe
right.
that's the future.
Yeah, no, no, no. I think that's true. I think that people need to be, once the P stables are stable, like if that ever does happen, comes to fruition, I think Pulse Chain is just going to be one of the biggest blockchains that have ever existed. At that point, the amount of liquidity over here will be more than even Ethereum. I think at that point it'd be just billions and billions and billions of dollars. And that just will give us immediate credibility, and especially once people see that the liquidity pools are burned, right? Nobody can even extract those. Like the Atropa DAI pair is 90% or 92% burned. And if that's in the tens of billions of dollars, like it's risk free basically.
Yeah,
If
right.
if nobody has too much supply, right? So the dev only holds like 1% of Atropa, and he's the top holder, right? So that's, if the dev is 1% holder and he's the top, like the nobody else can really affect the price too much at that point.
Interesting. Yeah, okay. And we're on our last 60 seconds here. I will slip in a final question. I was approached by I guess it was an ex-Hexagon a few weeks back, talking about a Hexodus. Do you think there's an appetite for such things? And in terms of migrating, they were talking about migrating eHex that was abandoned by Richard supposedly to another chain.
I think that's probably a bad idea. I don't know. I have a lot of conviction in Richard. I don't think he did this for nothing. I don't think he's a dumb guy. He's got a lot of money, and he always talks about how he likes to buy his own stuff. Um, so people that think that it's been abandoned, I think that they're just kind of getting the message wrong.